Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're ready to start our event today. So a warm welcome on behalf of co-organizers to today's event that is focusing on extended producer responsibility for textiles towards a more sustainable EU textile sector, of course. The discussion today will build around the project findings of CITUSAC, that is a Horizon Europe project aiming at removing current challenges in textile management and minimizing the overall environmental impact of the sector. So we will build on that. We also have a set of panelists to come in at a later stage during the event. We have two panels specifically focusing on the role of EPR in supporting textile waste management, but also a second one focusing on the industry's sustainable transformation. So once again, a warm welcome to all. And with no further ado, I'll give the floor to Mr. Gallet for his opening remarks as the event's official host.
Yes, thank you very much, and really happy to be able to host this event with all of you today. I think the textile sector itself is something that we really have to keep in mind for the next legislation, for the next term, because I think the textile sector itself, it shows so many huge challenges if we look at the targets of the European Green Deal, for example, because it is such a perfect example of how a global sector really causes massive environmental harm, really causes also a lot of exploitation, and is basically really often externalizing costs to the environment, to the people. And I think therefore it's really important to look at the whole textile sector from a holistic perspective, so that we do not only always look at the waste part or at the design part, but to look at it globally. When I was preparing this event, now I looked into the numbers, and I was like, how can this even be possible? Because yes, of course, we do European legislation here, but the biggest impacts of the textile sector, the environmental impact, the CO2 emissions, they are outside of Europe. So it's 80% of the primary raw materials that comes from outside of Europe. It's 88% of the water consumption outside of Europe. It's over 90% of the land use that takes place outside of Europe. So we really have the responsibility to turn this whole sector into a circular economy, so that we do not exploit the land, the water, the air outside of Europe again. And therefore, I'm really happy to that this event today takes place, that we discuss how we basically shift the whole textile sector towards more circularity through EPR schemes. When I was in Kenya last year, I went to Dandora. Dandora is like the biggest waste dump site in Eastern Africa. And what happens there is that very often a huge amount of European textiles end up there, because they're just collected and shipped as donations, even though it's just waste. And I think what happens then there is they just throw these textiles into the river, and then when the rain season comes, everything is flushed to the ocean and is gone. And I think these images is what we have to avoid in the future. We have to make sure that we use our resources in a responsible manner. And therefore, I'm really happy to hear all the contributions today. We have two parts. Like, I think the first discussion is rather about what we have already, and then the second is where we want to get. So thank you very much for being here, and I'm looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gallet, for setting the scene. And seamlessly, I'll just give the floor to Ms. Françoise Bonnet from ACR Plus and co-organizers.
Thank you. And thank you to all for being here with us, and especially, of course, Mr. Gallet. I think this is an important dialogue on EPR, and because CITUSAC, as mentioned by Ilias before, is a European project, involving a large variety of actors, so not only one, but everybody around the table. And of course, let me start by sharing some alarming figures regarding the pollution caused by the textile sector and the significant challenges we face in ensuring proper textile waste collection. Textile and clothing are the fourth higher pressure category in terms of use of primary raw materials and water. For instance, I don't know how many people wear jeans today, but you have to know that a pair of jeans consume 7,000 liters of water. Meanwhile, a t-shirt, 2,700 liters. So it's 2.5 years of a person drinkable water consumption. The production process generates around 15 and 35 tons of CO2 equivalent per ton of textile produced. The upstream value chain of clothing, footwear, and household textile consumed in the EU is the 5th highest greenhouse gas emission pressure category. And of course, this environmental impact is undeniable, and the urgency to address this issue has never been more apparent. Undeniably, EPR emerged as a potent tool on our path to achieving a more sustainable textile industry. Nonetheless, it is imperative to acknowledge its inherent limitations. It cannot operate in isolation. Addressing the intricacies of our environmental challenges require a holistic approach. Intertwining EPR with complementary strategic instruments like incentives for eco-design, for reuse and repair, ban of toxic substances, and of course also the fiscal measures. Only through this synergistic combination can we effectively navigate the complexities and forge a genuinely sustainable future for the textile sector. And we need to establish realistic expectations. It is crucial to learn insights from existing systems, notably drawing from the EPR framework applied to waste of electric and electronic equipment. We should leverage the experience gained from sectors where EPR systems have operated for an extended period. By taking stock of lessons learned, we can avoid the duplication of efforts and be efficient in our pursuit of sustainable solutions. And a fundamental principle guiding all EPR systems should be an effective full cost coverage, meaning they must adequately cover the entire cost of collection and treatment of waste. In most existing EPR systems, it is not yet the case. Additionally, while eco-modulation plays a crucial role as an incentive for producers, it should not be mistaken for a signal promoting more sustainable consumption. The price signal it sends is often too low to drive significant behavioral change. We must explore avenues beyond producers and acknowledge the role of public authorities in managing public awareness campaigns. Taking a page from systems like FOSPLUS, for example, we see the value of including public awareness campaigns in the overall cost structure. The Eco-Design Directive stands out another masterpiece in our journey towards a more sustainable textile industry. Its influence on shaping products for a circular economy cannot be overstated. It is crucial to acknowledge that the expansive framework outlined in the EU strategy on sustainable textiles necessitates the integration of diverse tool and policy instruments. This includes certainly EPR, but not only. Also eco-labeling, public procurement with specific ambitious targets for separate waste collection and recycling, as well as a robust emphasis on reuse. Together, these elements form a comprehensive set of policies that significantly influence sustainable production and consumption in this industry sector. As we delve into today's discussion, I encourage you to explore the multi-faced nature of our challenges and consider the comprehensive approach necessary for meaningful change. May this dialogue be fruitful, fostering a shared understanding and commitment to driving our textile industry towards a more sustainable future. I thank you and I wish you fruitful discussions.
Thank you very much, Francoise. And already in the early stages of the event today, I think we've heard a lot about the challenges for the textile sector, what it entails with regards to collection, pollution, environmental impacts, CO2 emissions, land and water use, as mentioned by Mr. Gallet, alongside, of course, the importance to address the issue holistically. Of course, it's important to equally step on best practices of EPR systems, as underlined by Ms. Bonnet. So before we dive into the discussion, I would suggest that we hear more on the C2SAC project findings, alongside the vision for a European EPR that can drive textile circularity forward.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ekaterina Stoyanova. I'm a policy advisor for sustainability at Eurotax, which is the European confederation representing European textile and clothing companies. Yes, today I would like to set the scene with a short introduction about our Horizon Europe project named CISUTAC. And our shared vision on a more sustainable and circular textile sector, focusing particularly on one topic that has gained a lot of attention in the past months, namely EPR for textiles. Within CISUTAC, our objectives are very straightforward. We aim to increase the circularity and the sustainability of the textile and clothing sector. Looking into and exploring solutions from different aspects, including technical, socio-economic, as well as policy. Looking into our activities more specifically, we are piloting solutions for circular textiles, here specifically referring to repair and dismantling semi-automated stations. We also look into enabling technologies by using advanced digital solutions and developing the capacity and digital infrastructure, specifically referring to sorting and fiber-to-fiber recycling. Within CISUTAC, we also seek to understand better the needs of the sector and also the needs of the consumer, raising awareness on the sustainability challenges of the textile sector and making consumers better aware of their purchasing decisions. And last but definitely not least, we also aim to assist our sector in the transition through, for example, larger stakeholder engagement, which results in events like this one. I would like you to keep this map in mind for the next slides that I'm going to present to you. It shows all of our European partners that are part of CISUTAC, and you can see that our partners range from companies to NGOs, industry associations, as well as university and research institutions. It is important to keep this map in mind when we're talking about our shared vision, because our partnership reflects a lot of different perspectives and brings a lot of diversified expertise. So within our project, we're trying to bring all of these different expertise and perspectives into one single vision for a circular and sustainable textile sector, which explores different aspects of circularity, ranging from eco-design through waste management, green public procurement, standardization, and consumer behavior. Our vision assesses EU developments and national measures, specifically aiming to implement the mandatory separate collection of textile waste, which comes into force as of 2025. We also aim to advise on strategic directions, innovation gaps, and possible solutions that stem from our project. Of course, we also try to align with the EU policy agenda. We want to remain relevant and try to feed into the legislative process as much as possible. And our vision has so far identified EPR as a key element for circularity. And this is the first element that we have worked on and completed. It will be followed by product design and all of the other different elements that we have identified as essential for circularity until the middle of 2026, when our project will be completed. As many of you know, EPR is a tool that aims to ensure that producers cover the costs of the waste management of the products that they put on the market. But we as a project see a lot of potential for extended producer responsibility schemes if properly implemented. EPR could reduce the environmental impact of textiles, it could promote circular business models and contribute to more efficient end-of-life management. But in order to get there, we have identified 8 key guiding principles. The first one of our principles is the need to tailor EPR systems to widespread circularity. And under these principles, I would like to highlight 3 particular points. The first one being harmonization. Harmonization is essential to achieve the objectives of EPR. If we have diverging systems across different member states, we risk having non-efficient and not well-functioning systems for reuse and recycling in Europe. Diverging systems will also lead to burdensome compliance for companies and additional unnecessary burdens for our companies, keeping in mind that a lot of them are small and medium-sized enterprises and they do not have a lot of capacities and resources. But if we want EPR to reach also the positive impacts that it has the potential to, we need to identify the remaining barriers to textile circularity, the costs for the industrial transition, and the necessary structural changes that we have to make. We have to keep in mind that member states may have differences in their waste management systems, and we need to remain some flexibilities for those flexibilities to be accommodated. The second point that I would like to raise under our second principle is the need for EPR to look beyond waste management costs. It has to be linked with eco-design. It has to be linked to boosting research and innovation where needed in the value chain, and also has to be linked to boosting more awareness in our consumers. And this topic is also very much linked to an aspect that was already raised a couple of times earlier in this event about the holistic approach to EPR. EPR is not a silver bullet, and it's not designed as such to solve the sustainability challenges that our sector faces. As such, it has to be seen as a piece of a puzzle, together with a lot of other different policy and legislative developments in the area of textiles stemming from the EU strategy for sustainability in the textile sector. So as such, we as a project call for regulatory alignment, which is essential to achieve the objectives of the transition. The second principle that I would like to highlight is the need for EPR to be designed in respect of the waste hierarchy, enabling waste prevention, efficient collection of textile waste, sorting, pre-processing, reuse, and recycling. And if we look specifically into sorting and pre-processing, we as a project know that this is a complex, time-consuming, and labor-intensive process. There is a need to be further automated, and we see a room for digitalization to be scaled up. So EPR could be a tool to support the move in that direction. We also call for measures to be introduced to scale up the local reuse and repair sectors, and this could be done through the introduction of repair and reuse funds. Coming specifically to recycling, we know that currently very limited volumes of textile waste are being recycled. But with the mandatory separate collection of textile waste as of 2025, estimates point to around 2.2 million tons of waste that will be available for recycling by 2030. We need a well-functioning recycling value chain and technology that can support it in order to have recycling that can deliver on these volumes. So we call as a project that EPR funds should contribute to the transition in this direction. Going to the third principle that we have outlined as essential is the need to incentivize eco-design. We call for common fee structure for EPR, including uniformly implemented, harmonized eco-modulation criteria aligned with the upcoming EPR. We see the need to provide certainty and predictability for producers, and that is incentive to incorporate eco-design in their production. And we see eco-modulation criteria as necessary to have this positive change. When it comes to the fourth principle, we also call for the recognition that textile products offer a wide variety of applications, materials, technical features, and requirements. And we need to acknowledge that some textile products may be better placed in different EPR regimes, for example, where they have distinctive properties for end-of-life management. Just as an example, we have to better understand that we cannot treat the dress that I'm wearing now in the same way as a firefighter's uniform or a surgical gown. We also call for shared responsibility and partnership in the value chain if we want a successful transition to a circular economy. We need to have strictly defined rules and obligations for all the different stakeholders that are involved in EPR, which will reduce eventually the administrative burdens for companies and will create an environment that is based on certainty and predictability. And also a very important element here that we also point out is the need to have equal treatment of all the stakeholders that can benefit for the transition to circular economy. We need effective compliance and enforcement to provide a level playing field for EU responsible companies compared to the imported products that we bring into the EU, also through online sales. We need to ensure that there are no free riders and that EPR fees are paid for all the products that circulate in the EU. We need sufficient time to implement an EPR scheme, to design it based on the specificities of each waste management system in member states and to consult with all the stakeholders involved. And last but not least, we also need to pay more attention to a stakeholder in this whole process that have a very important role, and that's the consumer. We need to make consumers aware of the sustainability challenges of the sector and make them better aware of the choices that they make and how they can best contribute to realizing this transition. I did not have sufficient time today to dive into a lot of detail on all of these different principles that we have outlined, but if you want to receive more information, I kindly invite you to visit our website where we can find the full paper. I would like to thank you for your attention and for attending our joint event today. It was a great pleasure to present our vision. We also look forward to a very constructive and fruitful dialogue today between the different stakeholders in our two panels. And as a last note, I would like to thank very much to all the partners that contributed to developing our vision, and of course to MEP Gallet, who kindly hosted this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stoyanova. I think the applause of everyone in the room says it all. It's been a very insightful presentation, so thank you very much for sharing with us your vision, the guiding principles, but also barriers and opportunities ahead. And I'm saying that as I also think it's been very stimulating for the audience as well, judging by the number of questions received electronically. And this is something that I forgot to mention at the beginning of the event alongside the housekeeping rules, that our aim is to also have some interactive discussion, take some questions from participants in the room, but also online. So when we reach that point, attendees in the room, feel free to raise your hand and we'll take as many questions as time will allow us. And for online participants, of course, you can use the Q&A box and we'll make sure to reply to some of your points as well. Now, I think one of the key takeaways already from your intervention was that EPR is a key puzzle piece. And I think it's also a good bridge to move to the first panel discussion that is specifically addressing how can EPR support the organization of textile waste management. So we'll have the opportunity to hear more about challenges in the textile waste collection and management solutions that EPR can provide, more on the important role of the harmonization, that we've also touched upon earlier in the event, but also about partnerships and cooperation and the management of EPR. So we have allocated 6 minutes per speaker for some intro remarks, and then we can take some questions from the room as well. But I'd like to first give the floor to Mr. Wolfgang Trank, team leader from the B3 units of DG Environment, and specifically the units addressing from waste to resources. So Mr. Trank, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction, and welcome to everybody in this room and also via online media. Yes, indeed, I am the team leader for the Waste Framework Directive revision, but when it comes to this targeted revision, I think it's quite good that in our unit we also deal with a lot of other waste streams where we have already more information or more experience when it comes to EPR systems. And it was already mentioned that it is very important that we have harmonized rules, and we are really in DG Environment, but also together with DG Grow, very keen to, let's say, to harvest the fruits an internal market can offer to us, and that this brings me directly to the first point. To the bad news is that in the proposal, when we came up with this proposal to establish EPR schemes for textiles, that we didn't dare to come up with an EU-wide EPR system. And this is based on our, let's say, on the lessons we had to learn in many other areas where member states were very keen, where we have already EPR systems, are very keen to have this under control, under their control, and therefore, even though, of course, with our internal market, let's say, narrative that we had, and we just had the 30th birthday of the internal or the single market, so how some people also call it. So this is something where we did not dare to go, and also considering the political environment currently, where we have not so much support for even for Green Deal, or particularly for Green Deal measures. And as already mentioned, the targeted revision when it comes to textile waste is a clear deliverable on our textile strategies, but also more precisely also on the circular economy action plan to make the textile sector also more circular, and also to increase the resource efficiency in the textile area. A little bit more now coming to the EPR schemes, and we already also heard that the EPR schemes are let's say newly established. So please bear in mind that this is the first step that we will have in the textile sector when it comes to EPR, and let's say the high-end let's say measures that we have in the circularity legislation in our toolbox, like coming up with recycled content targets, or is also EPR fee modulation based on sustainability criteria. All this will only kick in the following steps. The important thing is now, with the proposal on the table, that we come up, that we establish the schemes, and only later on we can, in subsequent steps, we can integrate these elements that I just mentioned in terms of sustainability. In terms of harmonization, nonetheless, we come up with some concrete harmonization efforts. We will come up with a harmonized Commission Implementing Act for harmonized formats for the registration of the producers. we have a clear definition who is producer, who is under the scope of this EPR fee modulation and also EPR schemes. So who is an obliged producer? So this is also very, very important for you as or for the industries, for the economic operator to be aware who is. This is very important. This clarity. Who is the obliged operator? Well, lastly, we have the objective. My last point in my first intervention is that we have the principle that any separately collected waste textile is at first considered to be waste, and then it requires a professional sorting step. So in order to be able to upgrade it again into a product for reuse or for preparation for reuse, I think that is this approach is very important also with respect to these masked or fake textile exports to third countries. So this approach is important. And when it comes to this sorting step, this professional sorting step of the separately collected waste, it's important that we have a harmonized sorting requirements. Of course, it would be good if we had already these end of waste criteria for textiles. Unfortunately, the works are not yet so much let's say progressed as we would like to have in order to already when it comes in by 25, it is probably highly improbable that we will have the end of waste criteria for textile until that, but nonetheless we strive for harmonized sorting requirements of the separately collected waste. I think this was my let's say introductory points that I want to make. Just again, we are just starting now here with it, and we are still trying to touch base with you, also with the stakeholders, and we are open in the co-decision procedure to further improve these establishment, the provisions for the EPR system establishment. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trunk, for connecting all the dots when it comes to lessons learned from past and various, I would say, different policies under the European Commission for this mandate that you referred to. And may I also say that it's great news that circular economy has been at the heart of the European Green Deal and so much prioritized within the current Commission. As you mentioned, EPR plays an important role in your approach on the toolbox of the European Commission. And it's also very important to note that the Commission is open for some multi-stakeholder dialogue and reactions from different organizations. And actually, this is the purpose behind this event organization today. Our next speaker is Ms. Marije Slamp, working as a policy officer on circular economy at the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands. So perhaps there is some best practices or good lessons coming from Netherlands that can help us build on the discussion today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and happy to be part of the discussion today. Let me start with saying that I agree with the opening words that have been said, that it's very important to have a holistic approach. At the Dutch government, we're working on circular textiles since 2020, and we also have a national policy program in place. And the extended producer responsibility was one of the concrete measures that we took. So we believe that EPR schemes can be a powerful tool to increase and foster the reuse and recycling rates of textiles. That's also why we have implemented one in the Netherlands. And to give you a bit of an idea why is that in the Netherlands, 46% of the textiles are currently separately collected. And that means that more than 50% of the textiles end up in the general waste. And only 3% of all the textiles in the Netherlands are fiber to fiber recycled. So that's very low rate. And that's also why we have set explicit targets for fiber-to-fiber recycling within our Dutch EPR scheme. Maybe for those of you who don't know all the facts, just a bit about our Dutch EPR scheme that we have. It entered into force on the 1st of July this year. And falling under the scope are consumer textiles, household textiles, and corporate clothing. And producers that fall under the scope of the Dutch EPR scheme have to meet certain targets. For example, the targets start on 2025 and producers have to report on the targets from 2026. And for 2030, we have targets. So at least 75% of the textiles that are put on market need to be recycled and reused. Within this target, there's also a minimum percentage for preparation of reuse that applies. So a certain part of the entire it need to be reused. Also 10% needs to be reused within the Netherlands. And we have also set specific targets for the parts that are recycled. So 33% of all the recycled textiles need to be fiber-to-fiber recycled in 2030. And we think it is important to have ambitious and clear targets for preparation for reuse, recycles, and waste prevention on the European level as well. And another important aspect we see and feel is also that consumers, it's mentioned before, know why, how, and where to hand in and sort the textiles. The producer organization in the Netherlands is working on forming the communication for consumers in the Netherlands. And I think one of the topics as well is how can EPR play a role in the design of textiles? The idea is, of course, that when producers are responsible for financing and organizing the whole collection, sorting, and recycling system, it means they also bear the costs. So as long as they design products that last longer and are better recyclable, they have, of course, a benefit when they also think about how to properly and circularly design textiles. And I also agree that although the extended producer responsibility, of course, is an important measure, it's not the holy grail that will solve all the problems that we currently have in the textile industry. We also need, like said before, policy coherence, and we need to align several policy measures to make sure that we eventually reach a circular economy for textiles. And to give an example, in the Netherlands, we have worked the last couple of years on the denim deal, which is a public-private partnership to make fiber recycled, post-consumer recycled content the norm in the denim industry. And what we see is that we need both more demand as well as feedstock to make sure that post-consumer recycled content can be applied in clothing. And both the extended producer responsibility legislation, as well as, for example, eco-design measures, together need to make sure that that happens, because we see that there's kind of a waiting game. So people are waiting to actually scale up the post-consumer recycled content. We need feedstock by implementing EPR schemes, and we need to set minimum requirements for recycled content through EPR legislation. So yeah, there's a lot of, I think it's already said before, it's important to have a holistic and broad approach to circular textiles. One other thing that I would like as a last point to the discussion, and I think it will come back in the second round, is the importance of taking into account the export of textiles. There's a lot of export leaving the Netherlands as well. That's why we also commissioned a study on the export of textiles, specifically focusing on the countries that where most of the streams coming from the Netherlands eventually land. And it looks at, for example, the social and environmental risks involved. And we believe that producer responsibility schemes should not be limited to European borders, and that we should take a broad responsibility for what happens with the textiles after they leave the Dutch and European market and export. And the report is still to be finished. We hope to finish it by the beginning of next year. Following from that will also be a number of policy recommendations. So we hope that from there we can continue the dialogue about how to shape EPR and relevant other policies. I will leave it there for now, but I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lam, for sharing us the Dutch EPR scheme and the vision on textiles. We heard a lot about prevention. They need to also focus on design when it comes to having more durable and more recyclable textiles. Also, another important element in the discussion, exports. And as you highlighted, EPR may not be the holy grail or a silver bullet, as we heard earlier today, but it has a very key role in the puzzle piece, alongside, of course, the necessary regulatory alignment. Our next speaker is Ms. Modardi, General Manager of Refashion, and I believe you are with us online. So thank you very much for tuning in. And I see you also have some slides.
Yes, hello. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you for inviting Refashion to this fantastic afternoon together discussing the EPR for textile and footwear. I was requested to do a very short presentation on how in France EPR for textile and footwear has been implemented a few years ago. So if it's okay for you, I'm going to share a few slides for about 5 minutes. So first of all, maybe for those of you who don't know Refashion, who are we? We are the producer responsibility organization managing EPR for textile and footwear in France since 2009. We are responsible for preventing waste and managing the end of life of the products that are sold on the French market. And the only finance that we have are coming from the producers, the brands, the retailers, and the manufacturers who are paying the eco contribution. So as you see, our expertise and our missions covers prevention, repair, collection, sorting, reuse, and recycling. We think that EPR is a unique opportunity to address ambitious and harmonized targets on the 3 stages of the product life cycle: production, consumption, and regeneration. If we focus on production, how to produce better and how to reduce impacts, we see 2 main ways of accelerating this circularity. First is to accelerate eco-design. It has been already discussed by the previous presenters, and implementation of eco-modulation. Like Ekaterina said, it has to be harmonized, it has to be ambitious, and the financial reward or penalty needs to be high enough to make it effective. If we move to consumption, we see 3 different areas. We have to focus on repair, and I know that this is not maybe on the hot topics of the EPR discussion that you are going to have today, but in France we have launched since beginning of 2023 the first reparation bonus addressed for the consumers. We have launched it in November in France, and it's working very effectively. So repair is a way to address the usage and the care of the textile and footwear. The second big aspect in this second phase of consumption is to engage local authorities to boost the collection rate. They have a responsibility in addressing the collection in their territories. And the third one, obviously, is to increase B2C communication to raise awareness on all the impacts of the textile and footwear industry. The consumer has a key role to play in buying, in taking care of the product, and then into placing it in a proper container to be collected, sorted, and recycled. And then if we move to the third part, which is the regeneration, how can we develop a full circularity from waste to resources? We see 4 different aspects. First, we need to increase collection by all means. Today, the average collection rate across the European countries is very low. It's around 1/3. We need to move it to at least 60% of the tonnage that are placed on the market. And for that, we need to develop a more effective sorting industry, both for reuse but also for recycling. So this means additional sorting centers, this means additional automated and industrial sorting centers. We need also to develop the local reuse opportunities, and obviously we need to invest into R&D, but more into the D part, not into the R part, because this is already mostly done. And the D part means financing recycling facilities to be able to manage the huge waste streams that we are going to have at a European level. So in a nutshell, this is why we think that EPR is the great opportunity we need to address on a European level. we as a PRO have the unique opportunity also to foster partnership between all the stakeholders of the industry. You have here on the slide a very synthetic approach of all the different stakeholders and how we as a PRO, as Refashion, we operate with them. And we are the unique facilitator, the unique ambassador, and the unique co-organizer of all this EPR scheme in France. So you see on the top of the screen the brands. The brands are critical because they are the ones that are going to pay for the scheme. So they have here an essential role, and we need to help them make the transition from a linear model to a circular model. Eco-design, eco-modulation are the two key elements. We also have a direct relationship with the two ministries, both the Ministry of Ecology and the Ministry of Economy, that are giving us the framework of the EPR scheme. We also are working with the repairers. We are also in connection with the citizens, obviously, the consumers. We also work with the reuse operators, the collecting operators, and the sorting and recycling operators. For those 3 or 4 different categories of operators, we have different ways to finance their action or to boost their action. Then we also are in contact with the local communities, like I mentioned, and we are also here to support and to subsidize all the innovation that will accelerate this framework. And my last slide I wanted to share with you is to present you what are the key objectives that the French government has given us for the next 2023 to 2028 fantastic new period. And I'm not going to go through each of these objectives, but you can see they are very ambitious. We have to reach 60% collection rate. We have to boost by 30% the reparation actions that will happen in 2028. We have to boost the eco-modulation, etc., etc. So as you see, we think, as we are so far the only PRO existing in the world, but we are happy to see that some other countries are adopting this new way of boosting the circular economy for textile and footwear. That was it. I tried to make it very short. Thank you for all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ardif, for your presentation and for adding more important elements to the discussion when it comes to EPR, addressing all 3 stages of the product life cycle, from production, why we need to produce better and reduce our impacts, moving to consumption, sustainable usage and care, but also regeneration towards full circularity from waste to resources. Our last speaker for this first panel is Mr. Jean-Benoit Bell, Research Lead and Project Management at ACR Plus. And it's a pleasure to have you with us today. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Elias. Thank you very much for having me here today. I will try to be short for this first statement because I think we'll have a discussion. I think it's more interesting for us to also exchange on different topics. So I represent ACR Plus, that is the Association of Cities and Regions for Sustainable Resource Management. And we did a study earlier this year on textile waste management. Our members, Brussels Environment, came to us and asked us to know a bit more about what they should do about the sorting obligation. But one reason why they asked that also is that we supported them in assessing the carbon footprint of municipal waste a few years ago. And to our surprise, textile, which is a very small fraction for municipal waste, has a huge carbon impact compared to the other fraction. And the carbon impact is mostly linked with the production phase. That's actually the embodied carbon that is in the textile waste. So for many municipalities, textile is not necessarily a hot topic because it's very small and it's managed by other players. But environmental point of view, there's a huge potential to offset carbon emissions linked with the consumption of the citizen. And so we try to investigate a bit more how local and regional authorities could play a role in youth textile management. And to be fair, there's not much done actually right now. Like it's when you look at textile waste, it's managed by a diversity of players, among which the social economic companies. But municipalities could do more about it and play a bigger role operationally, but mostly in terms of governance, to try and organize a bit better our textile waste management is organized. And we could find actually many examples of good practices for municipalities that started to investigate what was going on in their territory and take a leading role in trying to better coordinate the different local players, better help them with the collection, and make sure that the textile waste collection system was more comprehensive for the citizen. There's also a big role to be played on making people more aware of the impact of textile, because for many it's a very common good, and not everyone is aware of the impact of our consumption patterns. There's also like the way textile waste collection is organized is could be also optimized, because the collection system that we see locally are mostly like bring banks, textile banks, and we saw many good practices where actually diversifying the collection modes to fit better with the constraint of the population, or better addressing certain types of typology could also play a big role in getting more materials. And another point that I wanted just to mention here is the important role of circular public procurement for local and regional authorities, because they are also a big consumer of textile products, and those tools can also help promoting the use of more durable products. As far as we saw, right now textile waste collection that is mostly managed by like a charity organization are very fragile systems, because they are under many different constraints. One of them is the declining quality of what they get and the declining value. Right now, the system as it works in many places is to focus on reusable textile, because this is what you can do is reuse them, and the part that you can reuse locally will bring you most of the value, the economic value, and also will yield the most environmental benefits. And what is not reusable actually has almost no value, and there's no satisfying recycling route. So the benefits to sort them and recycle them right now in the current state is really minimal. And considering that, if we really want to move to ambitious an ambitious sorting obligation for textile, we'll need to collect also, like, the bad parts. So we'll need to expand the resources for collection and sorting to get also the part that has no value. That's why we feel like we need really a strong economic instrument to make the transition, so that those local collection systems can really absorb those extra quantities, and by the time we've got a textile recycling sector, we can provide the right feedstock. It was mentioned before, but the EPR system is also a strong tool to promote more eco-design products, because right now there's like the declining quality prevents reuse, but also many technical constraints toward recycling, and we feel that the eco-mobility fee could add that. And it's also a good way to have a more collaborative approach, because, as you know, right now waste management works a bit too much in silos, and we need a bit more collaboration among the value chain. Just to finish with my statement, like I talked a lot about textile waste, because this is the topic of EPR. We mentioned a bit eco-design, but we should be realistic about how much focusing on the end of life can do for the whole value chain. Like we also know, looking back at our carbon campaign, we know that recycling yields some benefits for carbon emission, but when you compare it to the impact in the products, the impact of production, you actually offset a small part of the emission. Like improving recycling will help, but it won't fix a whole value chain if the value chain is based on disposable products. So I think this discussion is important, but we should also look at other, we should not expect this end-of-life approach to fix faulty system, and we should also look at more general product policies to make textile more sustainable. Okay, thank you, and happy to discuss that with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bell, for stressing the importance at looking into the local level, specifically addressing some best practices and lessons learned from municipalities on the point on actually how we can optimize and best operationalize EPR in textiles. Now, this intervention wraps up a part of this panel discussion. And now I think, speaking on behalf of co-organizers, would be happy to take some questions from the room. There is a list of prepared questions as well, of course. It's also good news that we're very well in terms of time management. This is something a bit rare, but let's appreciate it. And maybe a question from the room to begin with.
I will address my question to Mr. Trunk from the Commission. We have already existing EPR systems in the EU, and we have a strong demand, especially from the textile industry, to have an harmonization, at least to have an harmonized system. So how will you deal with that you have already existing systems, but you have to put in place some rules, and how to include, or what will be the minimum standards you think are needed? Or have you already something in mind or written? And how to include the existing systems with this high demand of harmonization at EU level?
So do you mean the existing systems, for instance, like in France and now newly established in? Yeah, well, this is our normal business, that we are not starting from scratch. If you have a look at our scope for in Annex 4C, we were, let's say, screening what is already there and what is also the experiences from this, and why not to, for instance, to include the mattresses or the carpets, textile carpets into it. So we first half of the answer is that we tried to when designing our systems to see what is already there, mainly to learn from the, let's say, from the experiences or from what is there. The second part of the answer is that if we have, let's say, found the final system that we want to establish, then we will ensure a proper phase-in for the existing systems. This is we have it also in other areas. We just, for instance, in my other area is packaging, the packaging legislation, where you have also, for instance, existing DRS systems, deposit return systems in the market, and we will come with something new, and then we will kind of have to balance out in the co-decision procedure when it comes to the concrete specific provisions in the new law. Then we will, on the one hand, see to what extent they can continue with their national schemes, but in the other hand, what are things where they have to align with the new harmonized EU rules, and so when it comes to minimum requirements also. So this is a little bit the scene, and all in all, the last we will allow to adapt if there are adaptations for the French or for the Dutch system needed. Then we will allow a proper and adequate phase-in grace period to allow them to adapt their national schemes.
Hoping that it will be easier than for the packaging regulation.
Thank you very much.
Comment on that because it's really it's extremely sophisticated, the packaging regulation, and let's concentrate on the textiles today.
Thank you very much for your replies, and indeed there is a good momentum also with developments around PPWR. So thank you for highlighting. Perhaps there is another question from the room. Yes.
Yes, thank you. The question it is for Mr. Trank. This is Luca Campadello from Italy. I work for Erion, which is a multi-value chain extended producer responsibility scheme in Italy. We deal with electronic waste, with batteries, and since April also on textiles. We very much welcome the harmonization of the extended producer responsibility on textiles because Italy was working on an Italian decree on EPR. So we were lucky that you managed to stop it. So the standstill time period is a good point for our brands. My question is following what Mrs. Bonnet was saying at the beginning. There is already experience on extended producer responsibility. We are in the field for electronics, for batteries since 20 years. We see in the current proposal for revision some gaps that could be covered. In Italy, we say, once you publish the law, you find a way to around that. So it will be good to manage to have the same approach for online platform that we manage to have in Italy for batteries, for example. In that case, we managed to reduce 30% the free riding of producer of batteries. It will be good then to push on quality. You said in your intervention about harmonization, about quality standard to avoid wrong exportation. I see the need to put an higher level. Our producers do not want that clothes ends up in landfill around the globe. We have experience on electronics developing the Wheelaback standards and standards on quality. Maybe there's the need to put high quality standard also on the sorting and to not stop at the sorting stage at the end of waste criteria. We need to go downstream. This is I do not know if you can comment on that, but could be a good point.
Yeah, thank you. Very good points, duly noticed. You mentioned as a blueprint to fight the free riding problem, especially in online sales. You liked a lot the battery approach that we choose. We have currently very hot, only on Monday, we had a very long discussion in the Council Working Party for packaging on this free rider issue. And we really strive to balance out let's say the reporting obligation or the obligations for the producer with the, let's say, with the proportionality principle that if we have a small producer in one member state and he wants to sell just small amounts to another member state, if he has to have an authorized representative, which costs just for the licensing €500 to pay this lawyer or whatever. So we are really with all this experience, and for those of you who have more time, you can also compare what we propose now in the EPR for the textiles compared, for instance, to packaging, and you will see it's already much advanced what we propose here in our approach. With the online sales, we have let's say in the area of packaging, we are we started with the approach to say the Digital Service Act is enough when it comes to the tasks, to the duties that an online platform has, but we are now in the phase that we nonetheless want to clarify some duties, some tasks that that the platform has also to fulfill, even if they are not like Amazon selling it on their own name, but they are just the marketplace. So there we have a lot of areas where we the second part of your question, also very interesting, and here I can really also refer to something else. We really want to keep these waste in the EU. We want to have, because it's also in terms of resource efficiency, not you mentioned the we, but in we, it's much more easy to say, okay, there are some metals in it, but also we are convinced in textile, if we really create this value chain, that we can create a lot of employment in the EU. If we keep this we have a lot of benefits for the environment. If we keep this value chain starting from the separate collection of used textiles or old textiles, that if we keep the whole value chain within the EU, and we want to develop this holistic approach to make these secondary raw materials really so valuable that it is also from an economic point of view a viable stream, and we don't have to pay. So, but one, let's say, important instrument, and now I'll come back to the EPR fee, is the system that you have this mechanism installed.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Mauro Scalia from Iratex. I'd like to ask a question, not to the Commission, but to the Member State once. Ms. Lam, I appreciate all the figures you share with us, and we know very much how Netherlands is for a long time committed. You mentioned also targets for reuse, for recycling. Now that's interesting, and reflection we've been having also with our memberships. How can we best set targets? Being mindful that there is such a big data gap. We've seen, for instance, amazing figures also from the French side, and it took them more than 15 years of work to get there. So my question to you is rather, how do you see the implementation of that? Do you see this target as engraved in stone? Do you see maybe the opportunity, perhaps after the Waste Framework Directive is published, to make a data analysis, to look at the reality on the ground and reconsider certain targets? What is your take on that, if you can comment?
Yes, maybe to first explain how we have decided on the targets. We quite extensively monitor within the Netherlands how recycling rates and reuse rates and numbers and figures like that are every year. So we quite extensively monitor, and before we developed the EPR, we have commissioned an external review report research organization to get to a proposal on how we could shape the targets for reuse and preparation for recycling. So the targets in the current proposal are based on the monitors and based on the research that we did prior to implementing the EPR. And I think the difficulty with targets is always that we saw that with the online consultation before implementing the EPR, that there is always organizations that find that targets are too ambitious, and there's always organizations that find the targets are not ambitious enough. So we try to find middle ground between having achievable as well as ambitious targets. And they're currently set, of course, but within the EPR legislation, there's an evaluation period. So within 5 years, we will evaluate how the progress is for the target. So of course, we have to see how it evolves over the years and see if there is changes needed in the targets. So I think that might answer your question. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And if I may also ask a follow-up question for Ms. Lamp, We heard a lot about challenges earlier during the discussion, but when it comes to collection, is there any specific challenges that you would see for textile waste collection in the EU? And how shall we best optimize the capture rate when it comes to both quantity and quality?
Yeah, I think a number of things that I can say. Well, what we see in the Netherlands is, of course, that half of the textiles are still ending up as waste. And we have recently talked with a lot of citizens that was to get a clearer picture of where our policy for textiles should go in the following years. And what we hear a lot is that people actually don't know that they can hand in textiles that are not rewearable anymore in the separate collection bins that we have in the Netherlands. So I think one of the things is that consumers have to know why they hand in textiles, how they have to hand in textiles, where they can hand in textiles. There needs to be a network of collection points that are clearly to be found throughout the Netherlands and within Europe. So I think that is one of the things. I think also in the Netherlands, we have a lot of sorting and recycling companies that are very skilled and experienced with how to sort properly. So I think once we increase the amount of textiles that enter the bins, we know how we can properly sort, collect, recycle, and reuse, etc. But I think focus should not only be on the quantities of the textiles that we sort, but also on the qualities of the textiles that we sort. That means also the quality after when it comes out of the sorting process and after it comes out of the collection bins, but also improving quality in the sense of design-wise, so that actually the textiles that we do sort and collect are even possible to reuse, because sometimes the quality, it's mentioned before, is so low that we're not even able to reuse them anymore. Yeah, I think because there's already a lot of experience with sorting, we could learn from that and try to harmonize sorting processes as well and collection processes within the EU. We can learn from how it works in the different member states at the moment and see how we can improve that system from where we stand today.
Thank you very much. I don't mean to put you in the spotlight, but Mr. Bell, if you want to comment on that, please feel free.
Of course, I agree with what has been said. When it comes to waste, usually we see that there's three things that will make people sort. The first one is information. And as you said, like many people don't know what to do. Textile waste is a bit different from, let's say, packaging or bio-waste. Like you don't produce textile waste on a daily basis. So it's more difficult to have a sorting habit when it's something you throw away once or twice a year. So yeah, the information should be easy to find. There's also it's a bit linked with the fact that sometimes the operational side of collection is really scattered among different players in the same territory. Sometimes also there's illegal collectors. So sometimes it's a bit difficult for the citizen to find the right information to make the difference between the different schemes. So trying to harmonize that at local level could help also. It might be also interesting to understand the perception and behaviors of the people. Like try to understand how they see textile waste and what kind of messages can be useful for like motivating for them to comply. Second one, I talked about information. The second one is convenience. So of course, if you've got collection points, good density, something that are easily accessible, quality of service, like you need to find the right banks, clean banks, not overfilled. And also convenience means also finding the right collection scheme for any type of population, like some people living in vertical housing might need pre-collection equipment or might need different collection system. In big cities where you can't put a bin everywhere, maybe you need to find something collection on demand or something like that. In general, there's lots of different collection schemes. Not a single one is perfect, but you need to find the right one that fits the right person. Then finally, for waste management, we know that incentives works very well. It works only if, especially strong incentives works only if you've got the good information and good collection system. But of course, if you have pay as you throw or other economic instruments that will charge the residual waste, people will find ways to, well, we'll try to sort their waste. So combining those kind of instruments with pay as you throw could also boost a bit the collection.
Thank you very much. So we take it as a call for better information and incentivization. And as we heard by Ms. Lamp as well, consumers have to know. And actually, there is 150 of them connected online today. And one of their questions is for Ms. Sardi, that is following the same thread, perhaps. It's based on your experience, could we rely on consumers to pre-sort textiles depending on the waste destination, rewearable or recycling, using separate containers?
Yes, thank you for this question. It's a question that we all would like to answer yes, but the answer is no. Consumers are absolutely not able to differentiate what is a reusable item for my country, what is a reusable item for another country. And I know that this is not an easy topic, but when we address rewearable products, we have to think global, because there is an international market for second-hand clothes. And I am a consumer living in France. I do not know what are the consumers' habits in Italy, in northern countries of Europe, or in 1,000 countries of the world. So consumers are not equipped to do that. So our recommendation is to simplify, like Jean-Benoît said, is to simplify the action for the consumer. So it's only one action, is to bring every textile, every footwear, whatever the quality or the used or the stain you have to bring it to the container or to the collection point, and then the professional people in collection and sorting will do their job.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hardy. Is there perhaps a question from the room? Yes.
Hi, I'm Beatrice. I come from Stanley Stella. It's a B2B producer in Belgium. It's more, I have a question on the implementation, curiosity. It goes, I would direct the question to maybe Maria Slump and Maud Hardy. We know that there are often challenges in carrying out market surveillance at national level, and with the many laws that are coming out. My question is, well, the industry is often made out of small SMEs, small brands, print houses that may not even be aware of their own obligations. So I'm just curious, of course, it's on them to know the law and to uphold it, but I'm just wondering whether you had any challenges to see whether, you know, did all the companies sign up to ensure that they follow EPR schemes? Did you have any challenges to, did you have to look for them? I'm sure it's on them to do this, but just if you had any challenges, and what are your thoughts on this? Thank you.
Maybe I
can imagine
start.
that. Yeah, I wanted to say, because you have an EPR in place for much longer than we do, so we're just starting. So maybe it's better that you answer the question first.
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's a day-to-day fight. It's a day-to-day challenge to have 100% of all the brands, all the producers to comply to their obligation. As I mentioned, France has put in place EPR for textiles since 2009. And every year we have to fight to make some companies comply. So it's either some very small companies, like you mentioned, that are not aware of the legislation, but it's also some very big and very notorious brands that know very well what are their obligations, but that don't want to comply. So we are fighting with them. We are supported by the French Ministry of Environment, the French Ministry of Economy, and we also are supported by the customs. So it's a very collective work that we have to put in place together. And this could be also an opportunity to create a unique European registration board to make sure that the brands are complying with each EPR scheme. In France, 2 years ago, the French Ministry of Environment has introduced a new way to chase free riders, and it's called the unique identification number. And this number is given by Refashion when the brand has complied to all the obligations, so declaration and payment of the contribution. And this number has to be placed on every commercial document on the website, for instance, of the brand. And there is a unique register that is public, so everyone can access to this document, and every journalist, every one can see if the brands are complying to their obligations. But like you mentioned, it's a fight.
Now that we are talking about cooperation with or lack of cooperation with big brands, it's still for refashion maybe this question, because I think is the one with more experience on this field. One of the key emerging trends in last years is about big brands managing in-house take-back system, and so shifting away a good part of potentially textile waste to be collected by local authorities. How do you see cooperation in this field? Is this something that has to be tackled, or something that we have to coexist with?
Thank you for this question. We think that the brand's commitment to work on the 3 stages of the product life cycle, so eco-design, reparation, information to the consumer, and then collection, sorting, and regeneration is capital. So we welcome all individual initiative from the brands to be part of the scheme. In France, the government has decided to put in place the individual system, which has the same objective that the collective system Refashion is handling. So if a brand prefers to create its own system, its own scheme, the brand will have to comply to the same targets of collection, the same targets of reparation, the same targets of recycling, etc. So I think that on a very realistical way, it's impossible today for individual brands to be aligned with all these objectives. Nevertheless, it's very important for the brands to contribute to the commune, to the collective efforts. So we are very supportive of the brands that are asking us for support, or that are asking us for financement of experimentation, for example, because we think that waste management is a collective issue that we all need to address, both the brands, the consumer, and all the players from collection to regeneration.
Sorry, so if I may, because I'm not sure I did understand everything. So you promote this, but in the other hand, I mean, you have this individual plan that can be developed, but you don't push for that, or at least it's quite difficult for a brand to reach the target. So how do you do that? I mean, do they have to, I don't know, collect data, and that collection data contributes to the global one, or how do you collaborate with them?
In France, a brand that wants to be approved by the French ministry on an individual system has to prove in a request, a specific request, that they will put in place all the necessary efforts and all the necessary means to be able to achieve the result. So far, to my knowledge, there are zero brand that has been approved on this individual scheme. This is why we promote the collective scheme, because we are sure that mutualization of the streams, mutualization of all the efforts is a much more effective way than adding every individual system. But we promote everything because this is the role we have, and we give information, we share data, we share experimentation with all the brands that are asking us. I don't know if it's clearer, Michelle.
But I would like to know, so because here, I mean, at least in Belgium, and I think in other countries, without EPR, you have this brand promoting this collection system in-house. So would you promote this by asking them to collect data? Okay, and it will be included in the global target? Yeah?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you are referring, for example, a brand like H&M that is doing collection, they are doing collection in their retail store for ages. H&M is part of the collective system, so they are paying the contribution to refashion, because the contribution doesn't not only covers collection, the contribution, like you saw, covers a huge amount of different actions and a different finance system. But to be able to be completely individual, H&M would have to provide sufficient guarantees to the French ministry that they will be able to take back 60% of the entire quantities that they are placing on the market. So this is the key element. Today, the brands that are doing collection in their own retail store are not able to guarantee that they are going to collect at least 60% of the quantities.
Okay, thank you.
And just there is a question also from the audience. I will read it out loud for panelists. It quotes, what is the penalty if EPR responsibilities are not followed?
This is the big question always for all.
I can take the question for France, at least. In France, the penalty is managed by the French ministry, because we are not a government institution, so we cannot make penalties. We are suing all the brands that we are catching, all the free riders, and we are suing all the brands that do not pay the contribution. And the ministry is helping us in doing so. So the penalty depends on the amount of quantities.
Maybe just in the future system it will be, as it will still be a national EPR scheme, it will be up to the member states who have to notify to us the respective penalties for a certain non-compliance with the rules, and these the directive just clarifies that these penalties must be preventive. And we will check when we get the notification whether they are preventive or not, but it's still full national competence to establish these penalties.
Thank you very much. And I might have just two more questions, very brief. One is for Ms. Stoyanova. Can Citosac please share the link to the EPR statement paper that was mentioned in the presentation? Okay, I see some nodding, so I take it as a yes. So we'll be following up on this. And then a final question from my side as we're about to wrap the first panel discussion is, of course, we're doing all this and we're having this discussion today as we're all looking forward towards a resource efficient and truly circular economy with a benefit for the broader public. My question would be, what impact do you think that all in all EPR can have on the lives of citizens? If any of the panelists would like to comment on that. What impact can EPR have for the lives of citizens?
Can say something about that. Okay. I think the EPR system can really bring the light on this kind of product. And for awareness raising, we know that like it's one of the tools that they have to make people aware of the impact of the consumption and improve awareness also in the end of life. So I guess either by funding national campaigns or supporting local players for the communication, I think it can really improve the situation. Then there's sometimes we've got the discussion on whether the eco-mobility fee can change the pricing of products. And on this, I must say that the fees are too small to make a difference in terms of pricing. Like we need to find other tools to make a difference in terms of consumption. So I guess that it can improve overall how people behave and their awareness, but it won't be sufficient to have a strong move to a more sustainable consumption.
Thank you very much. And I see, meanwhile, Mr. Yanova has also shared the paper referred to. And last but not least, Ms. Hardy has raised her hand online. So I guess you'd like to comment on this question.
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to add to what Jean-Benoit mentioned. I think that the EPR can bring a huge benefit to citizens in allowing them to have access on the environmental impact of the products that they are purchasing. That's for sure, because the EPR has a huge benefit in raising up the investment in communication. We see that in France, for instance, more than 2% of all the contribution that we are taking from the brands has to go to communication. So this is a huge benefit. And the second benefit, I don't agree with what Jean-Benoit said regarding the economic impact, because when you see that eco-modulation can change the price from a product to more than sometimes 25%, I am sure that when we will introduce not only the bonus, but tomorrow the malus, it will have a huge impact potentially in the products that are very low price targeted. When you will have an addition malus because your product doesn't reach the durability criteria or the incorporation of recycled content criteria, it will have an economic impact on the product.
Thank you very much. And I would like to take this opportunity to also thank all previous speakers and panelists for their insights into this first panel discussion of today. I hope we managed to reply to the majority of the questions addressed online and from people in the room. And I think it's been lots of information, lots of great questions received. And looking into the time, I think we're running a little late, but perhaps we could take a maximum of 5 minutes break between the panels so we can enjoy some coffee that is provided kindly in the room. And then also online participants, you can also enjoy a stretch and come up with some questions for the second panel. Thank you. So we start at 40 sharp. All right. May I ask you all to return to your seats? Thank you very much. I see speakers and attendees have just got the seats in the room. So I hope online participants, you're still with us as well. As we're about to dive into the second panel discussion, specifically looking into how to design accountable and effective EPR to support the transition towards the sustainable textiles industry. So, of course, during that panel, we'll be hearing more on important elements for an effective EPR, more about policy coherence, externalizing EU EPR, but also enforcement and a level playing field. So we have Ms. Marie-Jeanne Gartner, Mr. Branson Skinner, Mr. Glans Mortensen, and Mr. Maros Kalia, and I'm aware Stefan Arditi, Mr. Stefan Arditi from EEB is connected online as well. So I would suggest that we start with some opening statements following the sequence of the agenda. So I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Marie-Jeanne Gartner from Reuse for her opening remarks. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks a lot for the invitation to speak. My name is Marie-Jeanne Gartner, and I work for Reuse, the International Federation of social enterprises active in reuse, repair, and recycling. And we are also part of the CISUTAC project and collaborated with to the shared vision which Ekaterina presented previously. So to answer this broad question, what are the main elements for EPR to really drive circularity? I identified two key elements. The first one is to prioritize local reuse. And to do so, we have an amazing solution, which is involving social enterprises. Why is that so? It's because they have the waste hierarchy and the proximity principle at core. That's for the circular economy aspect. But on top of that, they also drive the social economy by offering jobs and training opportunities to people that are distant from the labor market. And previously, Jean-Benoit mentioned the importance of people's motivation to donate. And that's where the magic between circular and social operate, because social enterprises create a virtuous circle in which people link donation to social objective, which in return increases their motivation to donate. But to make this work, we need to ensure that all the costs are covered by EPR schemes. Why? Because we know that we will face increasing quantities of bad quality textiles, and that will lead to the current model not being viable anymore. So, and on top of that, social enterprises and other reuse operators should not pay for the operation they do, which is about reducing textile waste. So that was the first point, prioritizing local reuse. The second one is eco-modulation rules and ensure that they drive circularity and especially volume reduction. We know that from current EPR schemes for textiles or other waste streams, eco-modulation is not very efficient, but still there are some basic requirements to make them efficient. The first one is to ensure that eco-modulated fees are high enough, and this could be done by decoupling the EPR, the cost-covering part of EPR fees to the eco-modulated part. The second one is to make sure that EPR fees are aligned with the waste hierarchy as it is foreseen in the Commission's proposal currently. And the third aspect, to make sure that eco-modulation really tackle fast fashion and overproduction, could be to introduce a volume criterion. So basically linked the fee to the number of goods that are produced and placed on the market each year. So that's the two pillars, but there are much more ideas to foster circularity within EPR. But still, as we heard, EPR schemes are not silver bullets. We know that usually they are not designed in a way to reduce material flows. They could present barrier to reuse activities, which oftentimes end up in premature recycling of products. That's why it's so important to make sure that waste hierarchy is at the core, at the center of all the future EPR schemes, but also to ensure policy coherence and complementarity between different instruments. We heard from other legislative developments, which are great, but we really need to make sure that they are consistent. For example, we heard from the Commission that the current proposal state that everything that is to be collected through separate collection should be considered waste, but that's not consistent with the GRC proposal on developing end-of-waste criteria, where they consider that donation should be outside of the end-of-waste scope. So we need to really make sure that those align, because it will also have influence on other legislation, such as the waste shipment regulation, for example. Secondly, I was asked a question, is waste turning into value? I think that in the current situation, reuse operators already considered waste as a resource, as a value. But it was not interesting or valuable to everyone else, because we know that collection and sorting in most of the cases remain at the expenses of collectors and sorters. But now that EPR will probably finance those stages, waste will suddenly become valuable. So that's why the waste status plays a key role here, and that we need to ensure that textile should only become a product after a rigorous sorting process by certified reuse operators. Otherwise, we have a risk of substandard waste management and illegal export. But a question that we can ask ourselves, talking about textile value, where is this value coming from? We know, as we already said, that for the moment, the value retention stage is reuse. So that's why we need to maximize local reuse. But to do so, we need to redefine cost efficiency in line with the waste hierarchy. Basically, reuse and preparation for reuse are better in terms of environmental and social benefits as recycling, but they also come with higher costs because we need, for example, to do repair operation, cleaning or testing. So all these costs, again, need to be supported by EPR fees. And to finish on the point of value, we should consider that value is not only something monetary, but reuse has many positive externalities when it comes to resource use, social and environmental impact. And why social? Because reuse can create jobs, but they can also be a social link by purchasing second-hand products. And also, we know that most of the time, second-hand products are also less expensive. And to answer one last question that was asked, and to conclude on this point, I would like to stress the fact that governance has also a very important role to play when it comes to EPR schemes' ability to drive sustainability. And that the decision-making power within EPR schemes and the ability to decide on the redistribution of EPR fees, which is oftentimes only in the hand of producers, should be a shared responsibility within all the actors of EPR schemes, namely social enterprises, municipalities, NGOs. So we should ensure a fair and transparent share of responsibility.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gardner. And I think it's very important to have heard just now your thoughts and suggestions on the key elements for an effective EPR that supports circularity. Of course, you also mentioned inter alia the positive effects of reuse, but also the need to overall ensure policy coherence within the different proposals. Our next speaker is Mr. Branson Skinner, co-founder and executive producer of OR Foundation. So it's with great pleasure to have you with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, and it is a great honor to be here. Despite my American accent and my cowboy boots, I have actually come here today from Accra, Ghana, and I decided to spend a significant portion of my carbon budget to do that in order to speak a pretty simple truth, that fashion is disposable. I'm glad to have heard others say that because it's something we need to collectively mobilize around. You may have seen, I'm sure many of you have, the documentaries that my organization has informed, looking at the piles of waste along across beaches, burning along lagoons. This is pretty moving, and it proves that point. But it's not our organizational work to document the problem. What we aim to do, rather, is identify and manifest alternatives and solutions to that dominant model of fashion, that of disposability, and to address the impacts that such an unsustainable method of doing business has. So to identify and manifest those alternatives, though, we do have to actually deeply understand what the problem is. And we have immersed ourselves alongside retailers, upcyclers in Continental Market in Accra, recirculating more than 25 million items of clothing every month, which is staggering if you think about it. That's a lot of clothes. We have followed the waste that is hauled out of Accra's secondhand clothing market to what was Accra's single engineered landfill. And we stood next to waste pickers on that landfill as it caught fire due to the overwhelming quantities of clothing which were blocking the methane offtake systems. We have followed the waste that is head carried on young women to the dump sites along the Koile Lagoon, which is a sacred site in Accra. We've investigated the causes, conditions, and effects of such head carrying on the young women and girls who really have no other means of subsistence but to literally be crushed to death carrying fashion's waste. We've created, as a result of that research, the country's largest job training program for these young women. We've also distributed hundreds of thousands of dollars in relief funding just this last year when the secondhand clothing market, or a large portion of it, burnt down. And we've worked alongside hundreds of market members to develop plans to rebuild the largest secondhand clothing market in the world as a model of what is possible with globally accountable EPR. Finally, we've captured thousands of environmental samples. One of the other reasons why I was able to spend my carbon budget to come here was because we were taking water samples to the Royal Netherlands Institute of Oceanography to understand how we can actually use sort of the evolutionary process that is occurring because of so much waste to hopefully decompose the waste crisis that we're faced with. And many members of our 40-person team join us from within this market environment, whether they were working before as retailers or as head carriers. They are immersed, and we are immersed as a team in this every day. So that immersion has informed our understanding of fashion's global waste crisis. It's also strengthened our position of solidarity with many other people, many other actors and organizations in this room. I know that with that knowledge, whether we're aiming to address the piles of clothing that we see along the beach, whether we're aiming to improve labor standards, be those in reverse supply chains or in first-hand manufacturing, whether we're aiming to cut down our carbon emissions, whether we're aiming to retain value for the vital reseller initiatives, the jobs training, the social enterprises that are critical for sustainable future, we have to begin by recognizing that the problem we are trying to address is that fashion is disposable. What that means is that the problem of waste cannot simply be sorted out. There's not a process by which we can put in one pile waste, one pile non-waste, and then say, okay, we're done. Because fashion's waste is not as simple as if an item is wearable or not. A good example of that, you can't see because I'm not setting up, but are the jeans that I have on, which have a gigantic hole in the crotch, which would make them unwearable, would make them waste. But we patched that hole, and now I wear them every time I leave Accra. I don't wear them in Accra that much because it's very hot, but they're my favorite pair of jeans. And they're 8 years old, and they've been repaired, and otherwise they would have gone to waste. So it's to say that waste is contextual. We have to understand that about fashion. It's not a plastic bottle. It's not something that we say, oh, I've used this, now it is done, now it gets recycled. It's always going to have deep context around it. And that's also why it's important to understand that the waste crisis we see and live in Accra, the air that we breathe, that is filled with burning crap, frankly, is not a matter of illegal actors. It's not a matter of unsorted clothing. That notion, and I've heard people say it, I'm not, pointing fingers, I'm simply saying that notion is wrong. It is factually inaccurate. The clothing that comes to Ghana, the clothing that goes to Kenya, that goes to Uganda, that goes to Nigeria, that goes to Haiti, that goes to Togo, it is sorted. It is exported legally. It is imported legally. The vast majority of clothes. Of course, there are small amounts that maybe move around under the radar. But the waste that we see is coming through sorted bales. It is coming through legal mechanisms. It's very important to understand this because it goes to speak for the fact that we cannot sort this problem out. Whether in Contamonto Market or here in Brussels, if it costs more to keep an item in circulation than that item is worth, then any person working in business is going to cut their losses and abandon that item as waste. And if we have made fashion disposable, we've lowered the value so much, which you said so eloquently, that there is no more value left in it to capture when you go to resell it. So the amount of money that it takes to recirculate something does not equate to the amount of money you're going to get from recirculating that. It's not about if it's wearable. It's about fashion being disposable. So this is why the keystone solution we see, the solution that has been endorsed by over 10,000 individuals and organizations from across Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, South Africa, Haiti, Togo, Madagascar, Chile, California, New York, London, Paris, Rotterdam, here in Brussels, is for EPR to be globally accountable. Globally accountable EPR supports the communities currently carrying the externalized costs of waste management, wherever those communities be, and wherever the clothes may end up. It extends the scope of responsibility and thus the cost of fashion to include the environmental and human impacts of waste management, thereby breaking the race to the bottom to help shift the industry out of disposability and toward value. This is what you've just spoken to, and this is what we've heard about. We need to bring value back. And this is a way of doing it, is to break the race to the bottom and incorporate the actual externalized costs into the item of clothing that we go to buy and sell. That changes the entire business model. And I'm very glad to see and say here that amendments that have been put forward, particularly one by MEP Galli, has made in this process thus far a globally accountable EPR within the Waste Framework Directive. Now, it's just in the amendments phase, but we're very excited about Amendment 492, which says that a requirement for exporting collected clothes outside of the EU is evidenced that, or is the evidence that registered entities receiving that clothes within the destination clothing of the shipment receive financing under an authorized extended producer responsibility program for sorting, preparation for reuse, recycling, and other recovering operations and disposal. This would accomplish what we're aiming for. And the supporting amendments around this to enable this in terms of the cost structure would accomplish what we're aiming for too, in terms of raising the price of goods, raising the value, bringing value back into clothing. So we see this as pretty groundbreaking for the industry, for the EU, for the community that my team and I work with. And I ask that we work toward that shared goal, transitioning out of disposability, bringing value back into fashion, collectively supporting the amendments that MEP Galli has put forward, and that we don't settle for anything less than a globally accountable policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skinner. And I think that those cowboy boots that you referred to at the beginning of your intervention, they walk the talk. So thank you for your inspiring work and your words on behalf of the OR Foundation. I think it's really been some food for thought. Hearing your intervention, how fashion is disposable and calling for a globally accountable EPR. Our next speaker today is Mr. Lars Mortensen, working at EEA as a circular economy consumption and production expert. So Mr. Mortensen, we're delighted to have you with us today, connected online. So the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Elias. It's a pleasure to be there and not to be there at the same time. You know, it feels a bit weird, but it still feels like being in the room. So I'm Lars Mortensen, and it's really a pleasure to speak on behalf of the European Environment Agency. I'm an economist in the agency, and I lead our work on textiles. Basically, I have 3 important points to make. Some of them have been made to some extent before. They're based on the extensive work we've done on textiles over the past 6 years. Some of them have already been summarized by our opening speakers. For example, the fact that textiles have the 4th highest impacts from consumption, and also the numbers on the EU exports of used textiles. So my 3 points are that first, we need to build on and learn from existing EPR schemes, as some has mentioned already. Secondly, we need to make sure that the whole value chain is considered carefully, which was also said by Brenton Skinner. And third, we need to set eco-modulation fees to enable textile waste prevention. So let me start with my first point. We need to build on and learn from existing EPR schemes. May sound very obvious, but we really have to do that, because EPR schemes have been in place in EU countries for years and even for decades for some other areas, and we really need to learn from these. So for textiles, we know that EPR schemes are in place in a few EU countries already. In France, as we have heard, in the Netherlands, as we have heard as well, but also in Hungary, have mandatory EPR for textiles in place. In Sweden, in Germany, in Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, and Slovakia, they have EPR for textiles in preparation already, and perhaps we can also learn from that. And furthermore, countries have EPR schemes in place for other areas since decades, for example, for packaging and packaging waste, for tires, for electronics, and for other areas. And when putting in place new EPRs, I think we really need to learn from these and don't repeat past mistakes. That's really important. And for example, it's really important that EPR schemes are as similar and harmonized as possible across countries to enable a level playing field for the industry. Secondly, eco-modulation fees are high and variable enough to ensure waste prevention. And I'll come back to that point. Now that leads me to the second point about the whole value chain, which was also mentioned previously. In our briefing that we published in March this year on EU export of textiles, we showed that in the EU, 38% of textiles are collected for reuse and recycling. Basically, out of that, 10% is sold for reuse in the same country, and another 10% is sold for reuse in another EU country. The rest is exported to Asia, 41%, and to Africa, 46%. And the amounts exported have basically tripled in 20 years. So since most of our collected and used textiles end up in Asia and Africa, these countries have to carry a lot of the financial and environmental costs of the waste management. And in the receiving country, some used textiles are downcycled, mostly in Asia, or resold at local markets, which is mostly in Africa. But a really large share becomes waste in these countries and need to be handled in the waste system, or else they are dumped somewhere, as we see very often. Can we somehow ensure and enable EPR systems to help waste management in those countries? I don't know, but I think this is really something that we need to look into to see if the EPR funds can really go to those that handle the waste, which is mostly in countries outside the EU currently. That leads me to my third and last point on the need to set eco-modulation fees to ensure textile waste prevention. Past experience with EPR for other areas, I would say, have shown that the size and variability of the eco-modulation fees are a crucial factor for success. If the eco-modulation fees are rather small and don't differ much, EPR basically just becomes a way to finance the waste management, which is good, but I think is not good enough. So eco-modulation fees need to be to ensure a systemic change and to enable the prevention of textile waste and the scaling of circular business models, including in particular in the reuse and the repair sectors. So eco-modulation fees should enable a paradigm shift away from focusing solely on waste management to focus also on the prevention of textile waste in the first place. And this can be done through rewarding higher quality, use of one fiber type per garment, repairability, and longer use, for example. And finally, regarding circular business models, eco-modulation fees need to be set in a way that give advantage to the implementation of scaling of circular business models for textiles. So to conclude this short intervention, I think it's really, really important to build on and learn from existing EPR schemes, to make sure the whole value chain is considered carefully, and to set eco-modulation fees to enable textile waste prevention. And finally, EPR, as has been said a few times already, cannot stand alone. Of course it cannot. It has to be seen together with ESPR, product passports, and all these many other instruments put in place. So I just hope that we can do it right, and look forward to the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mortensen, on such a very interesting presentation and sharing your thoughts. And of course, the results of the extensive work that EA has done when it comes to textiles, on what we can learn, of course, from previous EPR schemes, on the need to focus on the whole value chain, as this is something we heard from Mr. Skinner as well just before, on how it can also extend the scope of responsibility, but also last but not least on the important need to put eco-modulation phase in place. Our final speaker for this panel discussion is Mr. Mauro Scalia, Director for Sustainable Businesses at Euratex, one of the partners as well of the C2SAC project. So we're very much looking forward to your intervention.
Thank you, Elias, very much. And I think being the last speaker in the panel, one of my privileges is that a lot has been said already. So I can, of course, agree with most, if not almost all, that has been said until now. Two things to begin with. Textile and waste. We heard a lot about that. We had figures. Now, reflection on the fact that both are changing very, very dramatically. How textiles are made, chosen, and disposed of is changing. We have 16 pieces of legislation that this House and the Commission and the Member State are changing, are producing now. And I think that's important because EPR is one of those, and that has to be considered. Resisting also the temptation to put every law doing anything because there is specialization here. Then when it comes to waste, I think we can all agree that the amount of waste that is out there, it's staggering for sure. We actually calculated the EU, there are 7.5 million tons of textile waste generated every year. EU and Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken. 85% of that is household consumption. So the majority comes from consumers. This is projected even to increase up to 9 million tons by 2030, even accounting for reduction of consumption through all this legislation. With that in mind, it's clear that we need to crack the problem. And that brings me to my point on EPR. We think EPR should be very instrumental in doing that. And it should primarily support building a European textile recycling value chain. Why is that? For two reasons, very simply. One is that waste hierarchy has to be respected, reuse prioritized. At the same time, anything that exists comes to an end of its life sooner or later. And if we look at the numbers, the biggest problem we have now is we don't have valuable solution how to recycle textile waste. So there we believe EPR can play a definitely instrumental role. And I come back to that in a moment. Harmonization has been mentioned many times. I think no one can disagree on that. We all want the same system. It doesn't make sense to shower a little bit of money right and left or have 27 different rules across the EU. We also heard there are 2 member states already with EPR schemes, 3 actually, as Lars reminded us. Also Hungary have one, but I'm not sure how operational there is yet. So we need a harmonization, and we really hope that the Waste Framework Directive will help us in achieving this harmonization. And also be mindful that textiles are not all the same. Textiles are produced in different ways, in different places, and they are for different purposes as well. Technical textile and garments are completely different. And also how you reuse or recycle those, or the quality of those, is different. A good news comes from the business side. What we have seen in our value chain is that the interest to build a recycling value chain has exploded over the last years. We ourselves has also founded an association called Rehabs Europe, which only set to recycle 2.5 million tons of fiber to fiber by 2030. And we have seen the highest degree of interest across the chemical value chain, the apparel value chain, manufacturing of textiles, sorting and collecting. So this big collaboration that is so much spoken of, we see how this is coming together. And we calculate that to recycle 1/4 of all the textile waste we have, we need to build 250 new facilities in Europe. That's tremendous, because we don't see this happening now. There's so much waste which member states need to collect mandatory in 1 year, and there is simply no work being done on that. So there will be a clock that we need to unlock. So we need to expand the capacity, invest on this capacity, and again, EPR can make that happen. Building 250 facilities or expanding the existing one is estimated. McKinsey made a report in July last year, maybe many of you have seen it, as a cost between 6 and 7 billion euro, which is a huge amount of money. Of course, this is not all coming from EPR, it's impossible, but funds are already there from private industries, from different sources of financing. Last point that I want to touch upon, it's something very dear to us across all legislation. That's about level playing field and enforcement. And we're glad that it's not only us as industry players, but we've seen also many NGOs talking about that. In Europe, we are making many, many rules, but we need to be mindful of how these rules are implemented. Can member states enforce the compliance of these rules? Or are we only looking at the best performers or the usual bespoke players and see if, and closing eyes on free riders, because there are free riders. And that's something very, very important for us. How to solve this issue? Well, for sure, fully agree with the last point Lars made. We need to look at best practices. There are some which are already working on unique identification numbers, for instance, or mechanisms to make sure that everybody plays according to the rules. That's very much a constructive way how to deal with that. But first and foremost, we need to be aware of that, because market surveillance or enforcement is not an easy topic to talk about. Member states sometimes, they don't like to discuss that. We have seen in the eco-design regulation how difficult this is being to discuss with the policymakers. And it's important to be aware of that. So not just making law for the sake of making law, but be mindful of how the implementation works on that. So these are, at our point, from our point of view, the main things. Considering EPR as a part of this big change in textile and in waste, find new ways of dealing with this waste issue that we have. Some, you call it waste emergency, and sure, with these numbers that we have to change the way this is being dealt with. And again, the good news is that there is a capacity to invest in recycling and address this problem. The last consideration is that everybody has to play with the same rules, and we need to be mindful of that when we make legislation. So these are in a few minutes really our highlights on this issue. I really much look forward also to discuss with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scalia, on all your remarks, inter alia, referring to, of course, lessons learned, level playing field, implementation, and within the whole puzzle, also where EPR fits and the instrumental role that it plays when it comes to building a European EPR to support the transition of the industry. Of course, there is many challenges, as you referred to. It's probably a long road, but thank you for mentioning that indeed there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And this intervention wraps up the second panel discussion. This is the point where we can gladly take some questions from the audience, some questions for participants. But just before that, I'm very happy to let you know that we have Mr. Stefan Arditi joining us today electronically as well, Director for Climate, Circular Economy and Industry at EEB. So Stefan, if there is a specific question or some comments from your side, we'd be happy to also hear from you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you very much, Ilias, for inviting DB. Thanks for all the previous speakers for a very good point. I'm even beyond Mauro, so I'm really the last one. I won't take too much time. I just want to say that what I hear today is very interesting, and I think it covers the essential dimension we should expect through the EPR. First, to build on the intervention by the OR Foundation, I think it's really important that we now consider extended producer responsibility beyond the EU boundaries. I mean, we know that trade will happen. We've paid, or we will pay as consumer for a proper waste management, you know, in the price of product when buying items. At the end of the day, it's not a problem where it is treated. What's the problem is that it is properly treated. So if we ship items for reuse, whether or not they will be used by local population in receiving country, they will have to deal with waste at some point. And if they don't have the financial means for this, then it's totally unfair. So I think this is really an important point. And today, I'm not sure it's well covered in the proposal under the Waste Framework Directive, unfortunately. Second thing I've heard, very important, thank you, Lars, is how EPR and also reuse, how EPR can work for prevention. I mean, we've got a problem of overconsumption of textile, and unfortunately, the progressive business that try to get out of this cycle suffer a kind of form of competition, and it's extremely difficult for them to differentiate if very fast fashion items can be placed on the market, and there is absolutely nothing to reward those making efforts toward durability and less items placed on the market. And in contrary, there is a form of laissez-faire or incentive for fast fashion. So I think it's really important that we investigate this. And there is a dimension that is often neglected when we speak prevention, is what we call hazardous material prevention. And I think it would be important that EPR can also, one way or another, reflect, you know, the substance of concern contents in items, because of course they will create additional difficulties for a proper waste management. So I think that dimension, there is the quantitative dimension, but there is also the qualitative dimension. And maybe the link with the digital product passport, if we can ensure a disclosure of hazardous contents, substance of concern, can help to modulate fees according to this presence of substance of concern. Another things which have been discussed maybe more in the previous panel is that it's still very difficult for me to understand how EPR can really work without targets. What we've seen is that the two national schemes that were presented today, France and Netherlands, have clearly associated targets, and we do not necessarily have them yet at EU level. I've understood that there is some lacking data and things like this, but I think it will not work if we do not have any target, because notably if we allow competitive schemes, you know, on what basis they will differentiate, on what basis they will say that they fulfill their duty. So I think the target setting is absolutely crucial. Another things I've heard, which I think from Euratex, very important, and this would be my nearly my last point, is that we should have harmonized eco-modulation criteria. I think it's very important that we do not start having eco-modulation criteria defined country by country, because that will not create the mass market incentive for the design for the environment, for the industry that does not target one specific country, but that target often the EU market and even beyond. So this idea of harmonizing how we will modulate the fee is very important, and I'm super happy because I think it's been reflected in the Waste Framework Directive by the Commission. Finally, I will finish on something with regard to the scope. I think first, I don't think it's wise to exclude SMEs from the obligation. Notably in the textile sector, we've got many, many SMEs, and even if each SMEs cannot necessarily produce a lot of waste, there will be aggregator of this waste from SMEs, and those people that will then export waste will have to export waste which are not covered by EPR fees. So we are coming back to the initial problem that we will export our waste duty without the financial means, and I think that would be unfair. So adapted regime of EPR for SMEs, yes, but total exemption would be, according to me, a major mistake. In terms of scope and also to build on enforcement by Mauro, I think it's very important that we are very clear that online sales platform are also responsible for EPR. They cannot have a blank check to place product on the market without being responsible for the respect and the compliance with the EPR obligation. And this is something that is too often neglected, and we've made the case several times under the eco design, but I think it's very important to make it again under the Waste Framework Directive. And in terms of scope, and here it's more question, I've got the impression that we are narrowing the scope on maybe clothes and garments and maybe footwear, maybe neglected other huge amount of textile waste, can be commercial, can be also carpets and mattresses. And I don't pretend the best is to put everything under the same scheme, but I think it would be too bad to neglect those important streams and see if it's not an opportunity when we discuss that to also consider, you know, what could be extended producer responsibility scheme for mattresses and carpets, for example. Thank you very much. Sorry for being a bit long.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arditi, for joining us online, for making the time in the first place, because I know it's a very busy day. And thank you for sharing, of course, all your thoughts and concrete policy recommendations, including, of course, also some suggestions on how to best operationalize EPR. Is there perhaps any other comments or questions from the floor? Yes.
Thank you so much. I'll be quick. I'm Bettina Heller from the United Nations Environment Programme. And it's been really interesting and fully agree with everything that was said in terms of we need really a system change and a holistic approach. So we're working on various areas to bring more sustainability and circularity to this sector. But the one that I wanted to mention as a bit of an invitation also to the room and to the panelists, we are currently starting a project that is funded by the European Union that looks into exactly the issues with the shipment of used textiles, so actually secondhand, but we do know a lot of this, of course, is actually waste. And the idea is to research in 4 countries that are highly affected, quantifying what actually happens on the ground, how much of that is being reused, how much is being recycled, how much ends up in landfill. So we will actually be working in Ghana, but also in Kenya, in Tunisia, and in Pakistan. But then the actual objective of the project is to develop a set of global criteria, convening governments and other players around the world to make that trade more beneficial for everyone, and not only thinking about the environmental impacts, but also very much about the socioeconomic development of the importing countries. So we'll be happy to build up on everything you've been doing, and please just reach out if you would like to be involved in that.
Thank you very much. Some more questions from the room. Perhaps we can start with you.
So I just wanted to very briefly talk about something else that has not been covered here. 1 minute. I'm doing research on manufacturer behavior towards pre-consumer waste. Everything is pretty much the discourse revolves around post-consumer and consumer behavior. So I'm doing manufacturer behavior towards waste in Romania. Romania is the largest garment producer in the EU. Pre-consumer waste in Romania, manufacturers are about, in terms of number, about 4,500 factories. They generate somewhere around a ton per month per factory, but there are factories that generate over 10 tons per month. This waste is being collected by collectors, which decide whether they are going to landfill the waste or they're going to send it to cement factories where it becomes alternative fuel. That's this, another discussion there. There is no sorting being done. There are no recyclers, and some factories from outside Romania, for example, Finland, they would like to use their waste and do some kind of fiber-to-fiber projects. Of course, they cannot assimilate all the waste that is being generated in these countries where the production is outsourced. And even so, when they want the waste, they have certain criteria which Romanians cannot deal with. For example, the waste has to be sorted, baled, maximum 2 types of fibers, certain, maximum 70% wool, for example, 88% cotton, and so on. So pre-consumer waste is an area, the more clothing we create, the more waste we generate. So pre-consumer waste is something nobody's talking about. So I'm really passionate about that. And I think we should, within this group or beyond, we should look at that as well, because it's something we need to tackle. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, I'm Estefania Jimenez from Municipal Waste Europe. First of all, I would like to say that I've subscribed comments from Jean-Benoit Bell on the convenience of the collection systems and the importance of communication to citizens, and also the governance issue on EPR that Marie-Jeanne highlighted before. And I have 2 questions. I have one question for Mr. Trunk to the Commission. One is why the obligation to take in, to consider eco-modulation fees has been left out of part 1, part 2 of the annex in the Waste From Directive that covers footwear, for example. And this is linked to what Mr. Mortensen said before, that eco-modulation fees are very important for textiles, and also, I guess, also for the ones in part 2 in the annex. Another question for Mr. Trunk is why the proposal focus only on household textiles. And I take here what Mr. Arditi said, that we need also to address commercial waste. And I have a question for all. And do you think that maybe for the next political cycle, we need a dedicated piece of legislation for textiles, like we have for packaging, WEEE, or batteries?
Thank you very much. And perhaps before giving the floor to Mr. Trunk, can we just take a final question from the floor and then we can wrap up?
Thank you. My name is Kerli Kant-Väs, and I'm part of a waste to textile consortium from Norway. My question, I keep it quick. We have not talked today much about fast fashion and overproduction. Stefana mentioned that, but fast fashion is a barrier for many of circular business models, but also social enterprises. My question is, what should the eco-modulation criteria be so that the EPR will affect fast fashion and overproduction? So I guess this is for a commission and perhaps Lars, but other panelists, if you have a comment on that as well. Thank you.
Yes, I think I can also integrate your question into the question from Municipal Waste Europe about the eco-modulation. We have only proposed to go for the annex for the part 1 of Annex 4C because in the view of what happens on ESPR, we heard a lot of today about DPP and so on, but we can expect something in terms of the scope on the products covered by part 1. And but with respect to the long time for the development of performance criteria or criteria for the eco design, it would be premature already to come up with eco modulation for footwear. This is just from a pragmatic point of view and from the experience, how long it takes. It's already extremely complicated for the textiles to adjust the eco-modulation. And so this is the reason why we only limit it to the I will also mention another point raised earlier from the EEB colleague. We are only exempting from the EPR schemes the micro enterprises and not all SMEs. And if you compare it to other legislation, we have still other tools to, let's say, to reduce the administrative burden for the operators. But for this micro enterprises, we have based on the market volumes, we considered it would be proportionate or it would be disproportionate to include them. The other 2 points from municipal waste questions from just
yeah, so why the proposal is only focused on household waste and not, for example, to cover also commercial waste?
And wasn't there a third one? I thought you had a third one, but okay.
I think it was touching upon the broader vision for the future.
Okay, So on the on a textile, indeed we have meanwhile quite a lot of legislation which touches upon textiles, but it would have been also a moment to take it out of the Waste Framework Directive, but it's always we always have to start from one point, and we didn't dare it to do in this targeted amendment, and it was against the background of the textile strategy that this would have been maybe a stronger, if there would have been a stronger push, it would have been, but it would have delayed the targeted revision. So we in the Commission, we strive for coherence between these, for instance, when it comes to end of waste criteria for textiles or for the labeling, which is also a different piece of legislation, or for the ESPR. We strive for coherence, but not to create a new regulation. Also for political reasons, people could just count how many regulations the Commission is coming up with, and we don't want to give them another opportunity to say, you're just producing legislation, more and more legislation from Brussels. But I can reassure you, we are really striving for a coherent approach between all these legislations, be it within the remits of DG Environment or also GROW, as I just mentioned, the labeling. On the commercial waste, for instance, we see that for these waste streams, we have already some established collection schemes. And therefore, for instance, for the hospital or for these commercial textile wastes, and therefore we did not, let's say, we wanted to keep these alive and to continue. therefore our focus was really on this household. Last point from my side, also just because then I really have to leave on the fast fashion. Indeed, we do not. We see, let's say, we know that the EPR fee cannot stop the fast fashion due to its economic, due to the fee. But I think the biggest, let's say, tool here is, and I think also France Refashion mentioned it, if you earmark a certain or within the EPR fee system, a pro can dedicate a certain part of its budget for consumer for consumer trainings or consumer information programs, and I think this is the most important, let's say, or the most promising strategy to fight this fast fashion, to achieve this mind shift within the consumers, within our citizens, and there EPR can help with campaigns financed from the EPR fees.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chunk, and I see Mr. Mortensen has also raised his hand online.
Thanks very much. Just to respond quickly to these comments that were made. I think it's really important that Bettina from UNEP mentioned this big report they're working on, because we will really learn much more about what's happening in those 4 countries. In our work, we didn't manage to dig so deeply, so I really look forward to hearing what comes out of that. To the lady who talked about pre-consumer waste, I'm sorry I didn't get your name. I just wanted to inform you that we have a report on the way, which we'll publish in February, where we look at the amounts and share of unsold and returned textiles in the EU. And I can say now that the shares are about 20%. Of textiles are returned, and also 20% are unsold. These are quite huge shares, so they need to be considered as well. Some are destructive, but not as much as some think, and I think companies do what they can to avoid that. And just a final comment to Carly, I think that's the big $1 million question. How do we get the vision of moving away from fast fashion? I think the eco-modulation fees can help if we have a lot of difference in the eco-modulation fees that really help those things that are designed well, are high quality and repaired. And maybe perhaps if it combined with the EPR requirements, I think this can take a step in that direction. But they have to be pretty high, and there has to be a lot of variability, I would say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mortensen, for your replies, and also thanks to Mr. Arditi from EB, who I see directly replied to some questions coming in from the audience. So some questions posed online. I think that it's great news that we managed to have the room available for 10 more minutes. However, I think that's very good because we don't get to regret the coffee break idea. But as time is running out, I'd just like to provide the floor to Mr. Mauro Scalia from Eurotex for some closing remarks on behalf of the organization, on behalf of co-organizers, I would say, but mainly also as the partner leading the EPR shared vision document for the CITUSAC project. So the floor is yours.
Exactly. Elias, I will spare everybody from a detailed wrap-up of what we discussed today. As you said, it's 10 minutes late. I'm surprised nobody kicked us out from this room, which typically happens in the parliament. I think I used this 30 seconds, the 60 seconds final one to acknowledge basically the host, Mr. Gallet, who had the opportunity, gave us the opportunity to be here. 60 people in the room, 150 online, 210 people combined on EPR. It's very remarkable. I think we had all different views today, from civil society to industry to member state. It's a very passionate topic. So I think projects like CITUSAC, which gave us again the opportunity to discuss, give us more opportunity in the future to build up on these visions. It's a very exciting time, we believe. It's transformation happening. So we can continue this discussion of the coffee break and in the next appointment. And thanks very much for everybody for being here, asking questions, not looking at the clock, and enjoy the rest of the conversation today in the coffee room. So thank you very much, and let's move on. Thank you.